All right. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or maybe even good evening to some of our more international folks. But welcome, everybody, to the September 2024 Radius Community Call. Very excited to be chatting to you today a little bit about Radius and some of the updates that we have. So without further ado, let's jump into the agenda. So as always, we'll talk about the Radius community and kind of welcome anybody who's new and talk a little bit about how we'll run the meeting. And we'll also talk a little bit about some of the very exciting community events and activities that are coming up. We are actually going to present Radius in two upcoming open source conferences. So we'll advertise that a little bit and kind of give you a rundown on what to expect and when to be able to join and hear about Radius. We'll then talk a little bit about our roadmap and some of the updates since our last call. And then, of course, we'll go into the things that were part of the 37 release, along with the demos of the new features that we've released with version 0.37. And then we'll end off with some open Q&A. So let's jump in to some logistical things. And we'll remind you, as always, that this call is for you, for the community, to come see the latest demos in progress and get some updates and your questions answered. So please be active in the chat. So if you have any burning questions, if you have any questions at all, post it into chat, and folks on the Radius team are monitoring the Teams chat here and will answer your questions to the best of their abilities. And if you want to raise your hand during the call and want to ask a question via voice, feel free to raise your hand and someone will be able to unmute you and allow you to ask your question and have it answered via voice in the call. And then this is just a reminder that we have a Google group for receiving updates and news about Radius, and we also send the community meeting each month to the recipients or the subscribers of the Google group. So please go ahead and hop on the link. You can click directly here in the slide and go subscribe if you would be interested or have not subscribed already. And with that, we'll jump into sort of the conferences section of today's agenda. So we have two conferences coming up that we'll present Radius at. And the first one that is actually coming up here very soon in about 3 weeks is the Radius. We're presenting Radius at the Open Source in Finance Forum, which is hosted by the FinOS Foundation. So FinOS is finance open source foundation. So they focus on open source software for the financial and fintech industries. They're part of the Linux Foundation. And we're very excited to be going into joining their forum in October to talk about how we can use Radius. So they have this application called TraderX, which is kind of like a sample like reference architecture application, kind of like the eShop equivalent of of uh, of the finance FinOS community, and the TraderX is a reference application for them, and it has something like between I would venture to guess 6 to 10 microservices, all containerized. And we actually spent some time to ratify that application and have been able to successfully deploy the their TraderX sample application across local and cloud environments, all using Radius and doing like zero work on the infrastructure side, using everything that was pre-provisioned or pre-set up for us. So very exciting. So there's a topic link you can click in to find out more about what we'll talk about during the conference. And we'll also have a booth there. So if you happen to be there as well, like feel free to stop by the booth to come talk to us and look at the demo in person as well. The event link is also here on this page. Feel free to navigate to that and go check it out and put it on your calendars if you're interested. And then fast forward about 2 more weeks from that event, we have another event coming up, and we're very happy to announce that we've been accepted as a lightning talk for BackstageCon. So BackstageCon is one of the co-hosted events for KubeCon North America, and it'll be in Salt Lake City, November 12th. We'll have the link to the event here in the slides. You can go add to your calendar and find out where you can also view the event online, I believe. So the topic we'll present is how we'll present how we leveraged Backstage to build out the Radius dashboard. So some of you might be even familiar with the Radius dashboard already and have played around with it. We're going to go take a little deeper peek into the dashboard and talk about all the philosophies behind why we chose to build it on Backstage, and also talk a little bit more about the implementation details on our dashboard implementation on Backstage. And then, of course, we'll demo the dashboard itself. So if you're interested in this, please also join. It's a lightning talk, so it's just a 10-minute talk. So we're going to be cramming a bunch of content into this lightning talk and hopefully be able to showcase the work that we're doing in Radius to the Backstage community as well. And then we wanted to surface some new blog posts that we have published in the past month. Specifically, we published one about how Radius is leveraging the new Bicep extensibility model to bring Radius features to Bicep, and we'll learn more about that here in the demos as well. But if you're interested in the blog post, go ahead and click into the link here and give it a read. And then roadmap updates. So in terms of our roadmap, there are a couple of things that that have changed since the last time we've spoken. So the roadmap, specifically, what the biggest thing that's changed is that we are now supporting workload identity support for both AWS and Azure. So if you remember, a couple weeks or maybe even a couple months ago, we shipped support for Azure Workload Identity. We've as a part of 0.37, we've also now shipped support for AWS IRSA, which is IAM roles for service accounts, the equivalent of workload identity on the AWS side. So we've shipped support for that. So now we will be closing off this item once we complete the final task of moving all of our internal Radius functional testing authentication mechanisms into these workload and service identity models. So once we complete that, we'll complete this particular roadmap item. But very pleased to say that this roadmap item is now feature complete. So you can go ahead and leverage these and go try them out today. And then recipes, we're very close to completing private registry authentication for Bicep. So just a little bit of a preview for next release. You'll probably in the next community call hear about private Bicep registries being available. And then on top of that, we're continuing our efforts in designing GitOps-based deployments, which I think you got a little bit of a taste of in the previous community call. And then also user-defined resource types. These two are both in active design and development. They're pretty big ticket items. So please go ahead and head over to the roadmap, engage with these the tickets for each of these, and upload, comment on anything that might be interesting to you or that you might want to see for any of these roadmap items. And then also remember to go into our design repo, design notes repo, to go participate in the designs. You can go read up on all the pending designs that we have for the things that we are implementing. and help shape the future and the roadmap of Radius. All right, so with that, we'll jump into kind of like what we've released as a part of our journey and our roadmap as a part of version 0.37. So we're very pleased to say that Radius Bicep is now merged into main Bicep. So if you remember, when we first started Radius, we had to fork the original, we had to have an internal fork of the Bicep code base. And because we wanted to build a couple of things that were sort of more experimental. And since then, we've now been able to merge everything back into the main Bicep and leverage this new extensibility framework for Radius. So that's very, very cool. And we'll do a little bit of a demo here on this in a little bit. And then, as I mentioned earlier too, we now have support for AWS IAM roles for service accounts. So the equivalent of Azure Workload Identities for AWS is now available. We'll get a demo of this here in a bit as well. Feel free to click into the links on both of these items on the PowerPoint slide, and it will take you to the documentation for these. So if you want to read up on them and try out these new features, please feel free to do so. And lastly, we delivered some testing infrastructure improvement items as a part of the most recent release. Specifically, we separated cloud and non-cloud resource required tests for functional tests. So previously, all functional tests had to be approved. And the reason why we have an approval workflow is because cloud functional tests that test on our cloud infrastructure require access and usage of secrets and things like that and configurations in the repo. And obviously needed to access the cloud infrastructure. So all those tests, the cloud infrastructure tests, required approvals from either a maintainer or an approver of Radius before the test would run. And the gate for this was pretty binary. It was either approve all tests or do test don't run. We've since separated them out because we've realized that our testing suite does have a big component of them test locally on your local clusters. So we've separated them out because the local tests don't actually need approval. Like local tests can run on the local cluster and the resource can spin up locally and then destroyed after the tests are done. So since they don't access cloud resources, we don't need to require approval for those. So we decided to separate them out so that now you have two separate workflows in functional testing. One kicks off automatically without any approvals. All the local tests can now be run automatically without approvals. Whereas the cloud specific tests still require approvals, but overall, your cycle time or the runtime for functional tests, or the lead time, I should say, for functional tests should decrease significantly because now tests that can run locally will run right away. And that should hopefully improve the testing velocity and sort of the development velocity for our contributors and make for a better contribution experience. So if you have any feedback on that, definitely let us know. We're all ears and always looking to improve that further. And I think last time we shared a blog post about how we achieve this, or I think we will share a blog post about how we achieve this in the near future, and we'll share that with the team as well. Great. So with that, we'll, as always, we'll go into our change log and look at all the very many changes that the team and community have put into version 0.37. So thank you everybody who contributed to Radius, and we wouldn't be here without such a thriving and great community that we have. So feel free to click into this v.37 link if you want to look at the release notes and the full changelog of everything that was part of this release, and also some instructions on how to upgrade your Radius installation to the latest release as well. And then on the topic of community, we wanted to, again, point you to our good first issues filters. So if you're a new contributor or if you're someone who's looking to contribute to Radius for the first time, feel free to hop into these links. These will link you to our filters that we have curated a bunch of good first issues that you can tackle. And the Radius maintainers strive to make the good first issues very easy to get into. And we try to put a bunch of good information onto there on what needs to be done and how you can get started. And then I think very helpful is we try to find the area in the code and even the line numbers that we would suggest you looking at modifying to fix this issue. So feel free to hop on there and browse around if you're looking to tackle some good first issues, or if you're a seasoned contributor and you just want to pick up something really quick and easy. Good first issues is a good place to go for that as well. All right, and then without further delay, we'll jump into the exciting part of the community call. And I have Shruti here from the Radius maintainer team to talk about the updated flow with Bicep compiler, Bicepconfig. So Shruti, you want to take it away?
Yeah, thanks, Will. Let me share my screen, and please let me know if any of the text needs to be bigger and if it's readable. Yeah, so I'm just going to be demoing some of the changes that we made as part of the merge to the official Bicep compiler. This is something that we've been working on for a while and collaborated with the Bicep team with, so it's pretty exciting for us to finally be able to be on the official version of Bicep as opposed to maintaining our own fork. So there are some breaking changes that did come up as we moved to the Bicep compiler. So the demo is kind of going to be explaining some of those changes and the updates that you would need to make to your own repositories and your own Radius workspaces in order to move to the official Bicep compiler with the 0.37 release. So the first thing I'm going to show is a RAD version. So I have downloaded the 0.37 version of Radius. And if you see earlier when we did our releases, the Bicep release would correspond with the release version of Radius. You can see now that it's 0.29, and that's going to be the latest released version of Bicep as opposed to the version of Radius Bicep that we were releasing previously. So now my installation of Radius is using Bicep in the background as opposed to Rad Bicep and our forked version of it. So I'm going to start with a rad init. And here I'm going to say that I want to set up the application in the current directory. So this is going to set up my app.bicep and also a new additional bicep config file that is now needed in order to use Radius with the official bicep compiler. So if I do a quick ls, you can see that I now have my app.bicep and then the bicep config. So we can go look at these files more closely and kind of see what the changes are. So the bicep configuration file is basically what has enabled us to move to using the official compiler. So the way bicep or Radius Bicep used to work is that we used to have a separate fork where we would take all of our resource schemas and we would upload those schemas or generate those schemas into a JSON format and keep those in our rad bicep fork. Now what we're doing with Bicep is that we generate those JSON schemas and we upload them to an OCI registry. So in our case, we're using an ACR. We upload those to the ACR, and then we set up some features with Bicep that allow us to pull from that ACR and read the schemas that we have uploaded for our Bicep types. So this first code block in this Bicep config just sets up all the necessary Bicep features that Radius now needs in order to use the official Bicep compiler. And so the second part of this file is the actual registries that we're using, and we name those under extensions. So we have two extensions. One of them is the Radius extension, and that's going to be all of the Radius managed resources. So things like containers or Redis caches and MongoDB. Those are all going to be generated into JSON schemas and uploaded using Bicep to this ACR endpoint, and that's going to have all the radius types. The second extension that we now use is the AWS extension. So that is any AWS resources that are defined in their cloud control specs. So same thing, we compile those into JSON schema, and then we upload that using Bicep to the ACR. Yeah, and these ACR endpoints are publicly accessible, so you should be able to access them without needing any authentication or anything like that. What else? Oh, yes. So we tag our types per release and also on Edge. So if you are using an Edge build of Radius, you could update this to be latest, and that'll pull the latest schema changes that are on our Edge version of Radius. Um, for releases, the generated bicep config is going to pick the tag that is associated with this release. So because I downloaded the 0.37 version of Radius, this generated bicep config is going to have the 0.37 version of these schema files. And this is just the basic schema that you need to use Radius with Bicep. The cool thing about merging to Bicep is that now there's a lot of new, really cool features that you are able to use. The Radius Bicep fork was using a pretty old version of Bicep, so there are a lot of new features and implementations that we did not have access to that now the community members do. So this Bicep config has the basic setup. If you would like to add any more Bicep features on top of that, we definitely encourage you to do so and play around with those, because it opens up a lot of new, really cool features that they have implemented since we forked over from Bicep. So that is the Bicep config file. The next changes are going to be in the actual application Bicep definition. So earlier we used to define our imports as like import radius as radius. Now, because we're using extensions and extension registries, we just need to specify that we want to use the extension radius. And then Bicep knows that, okay, I've already defined this radius extension in my Bicep config. I'm going to go find that extension, pull that from the ACR, and then I'll be able to use all the type schemas that were defined in that ACR. The other thing I want to point out is that we have the official Bicep VS Code extension installed. So you can see here that this is the extension that I have installed as opposed to the Radius Bicep extension. So this has been disabled. It's not being used right now. We are using the official Bicep VS Code extension. Just one thing to note, the Radius Bicep extension and the Bicep extension are not compatible. So you can only have one of these enabled at a single time. So if you are using 0.37, just make sure that you're using the official Bicep VS Code extension and you've disabled the Radius Bicep extension, because you can't have both of them enabled at the same time. Yeah, so in this app.bicep, pretty much everything else is the same. I haven't changed any of these resource definitions. So the biggest change to your app.bicep is going to be just updating your import statements. The other change that I wanted to note is in how we access secrets. So earlier with Radius, if I wanted to add like a Redis cache, for example, let me just add something like that really quickly. And I guess the data in this is not really important. Okay, so let's say I had a Redis cache and I wanted to connect that Redis cache within my container. I would normally do something like set up my environment variables, and then I would have the value of that connection, and I would do something like Redis dot connection string. So this connection string function is something that we had added into the Radius Bicep fork, that I guess we kind of had to hard code in there. Now that we've moved to the official Bicep, we can access these using functions on resources. So instead of accessing it with a dot connection string, I'm going to access it with a function called list secrets. And then list secrets is going to return an object containing all of my secrets on the resource. And then instead, I can access that with the specific value. So whether it's a connection string or password, this is going to be the other update to the way we access resource secrets. going to delete that for now since it's not technically set up on this container. Yeah, so that's pretty much the changes that went into the app.bicep. We can go ahead and deploy this bicep file just to make sure that everything works as expected. And then we'll just give it a minute to deploy. Yeah, great. So now you can see that with the official bicep, everything is working as we would like it to. So this has been a pretty big change for us. So it's really cool to see that we're now finally on the official version of Bicep. If you have any questions on the specific implementation details, the blog post starts to get into some of those and some of the historical reasons of why we had the fork and now why we chose to move it over, and also some of the implementation that went into the actual merge. Um, yeah, and I think the contribution process has also been streamlined pretty well because now if you change our type spec schemas and you run like a make generate and you auto generate the JSON schemas, you don't really need to do any extra work. Whereas before you would have the updates to the schema, then you would need to go to the radius bicep fork, merge in a PR to the radius bicep fork. And then once the fork gets updated, then you can go back to the radius repo and test all your changes and everything. Now it's way more streamlined as you just open a PR with your schema changes. And once you merge that PR in, your type schema should automatically be pushed to the ACR and updated. So hopefully the contribution process to changing these resources and the resource schemas is also a little easier to manage. But yeah, definitely check out that blog post if you're interested in the technical details, and definitely recommend checking out Bicep and the Bicep docs and the Bicep repo to see all of the new features that you're now able to use on the official Bicep. And yeah, if there are any feature requests or any additional things that you would like us to add to this, definitely open issues on the repo. Let us know. We're happy to look into those. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat and I'll get to them as they come in.
Awesome. Thank you, Shruti, for the demo and the quick walkthrough of all the changes. Super exciting stuff. I know you've been working hard on this, and thanks to Shruti for leading this effort, and thanks to all the Radius contributors that contributed to it, and of course, thanks to the Bicep team who worked with us to very closely on making this change happen. So we're super excited about it. Please go check it out. Check out the latest version of Radius 37 to explore the new Bicep features and implementation. Great. So the next topic we'd like to cover, or the next demo we'd like to cover, is the AWS IAM roles for service accounts. So we have Nithya from the Radius maintainership team here, who was the primary developer on this, and will give us a quick demo here. Okay, we can see your screen, Nithya. So if you want to zoom in a bit so that we can see it better. A little bit more.
Is this
A
better?
little bit more. Nope, a little bit more.
Okay.
A little bit more. There we go. That should work. When it's uncomfortably big, that's what I've been told is the sweet spot for streaming. So thank you. All right, so I'll have you take it away.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nithya, and I'm here to demo the AWS IRSA support that we currently added to Radius with this release. Vishwa and I, both of us worked on this feature. It basically is the equivalent of the workload identity feature that you had already experienced with Azure with Radius. As you can see on my screen, there is cluster which has some OIDC providers, and we are also on the latest Radius. So with that, I will pull up the Radius documentation that details how to set up AWS IRSA. So we've added a section under the cloud providers, AWS provider. We already had support for configuring a AWS provider using the secret access keys, but the preferred way to configure would be IRSA. With this, we eliminate the need to rotate secrets, and it is a better security practice. So if you go to this page, you you can see that one of the first things that we have to do is to set up a IAM role on AWS, which has policies that are necessary. I've just created a radius role. You can see that here. And it has the policy associated with it, which allows us to create whatever AWS resource we want through Radius. So the key thing to configure in this role would be the trust relationship, which basically establishes which of the service account in which of the Kubernetes namespace is allowed to assume this specified role. And you can see that the principal associated with this trust relationship is the ID of one of the OIDC providers that is associated with the cluster. Since STS is the service that validates the service tokens, that is the audience for this trust relationship. And the subject is going to be the parts of the radius, which is going to be communicating directly to AWS and putting the requests that are to be created or accessing or any of the API calls. Since it's a web request, we are going to say the action that is allowed is assume role with web identity. So you can see we have two statements here. Let me move this a bit. So in JDS, the service that directly communicates with AWS primarily is UCP. So we have to configure the UCP pod to use this. You will see the configuration, and I think then it would become clear. But UCP should be part of the trust relationship, and the other part that other service account, I should say, that as part of the server as part of the trust relationship is the applications RP. Applications RP communicates directly with AWS when we use Terraform. So the Terraform provider directly talks to AWS too, which is why we needed this statement as well. So that's about the trust relationship. Next, if we go back to the document, we can see that we can, now that we have the role configured as needed, we can proceed to installing the Radius itself. I have the latest version of Radius installed here, and I installed it using the option provided. So this is the specific option that we provide when we install Radius so that we can enable IRSA. The reason this needs to be done at the install time is because we have to mount AWS token as projected volume into the pods. So when we pass in this parameter, that's basically what happens. So if we go back to the terminal and look at the description, for instance, let's say describe. Then you will see this specific configuration happening, and you would see a volume mounted here too. So this is essential for this service account to be trusted, and it's part of the IRSA configurations that is needed. And if we had described the applications RP pod, then you would have seen a very similar set of statements there too. So beyond that, we just have to configure the provider as we used to do before. The provider basically decides the scope of the request. So we want our resources to be deployed in a certain account in a certain region. Then we use a RAD and update to specify the region and the account information. So when you go to the environments, if you have configured a provider, you would be able to see this particular section where we can see that this is specifically the account and the region to which the AWS resources would be deployed. The other part of the configuration, which I think would be the last one, would be to register the role that we just created in AWS console as the credential that's going to be used for used with IRSA to deploy the resources. So since I have registered, this is a bit weird. Okay. You can see that I have already registered a credential for the AWS provider. So with that, we complete all of the setups that is needed for deploying resources with IRSA. Now we can deploy the AWS resources. So this is the Bicep file that I have copy pasted here. This is the Bicep extensibility feature that Shruti was talking about. We have the extensions here, and rest of it you can see just uses the makes a S3 resource, and there is an application that is linked to the AWS S3 resource. So let me go ahead and deploy that.
So Nithya, this is now deploying to the AWS account that you had set up
Yes,
the identity for with your IRSA configuration. Is that right?
yes, that's right. So
Okay, perfect.
this is the bucket that was created. So if we go to S3 buckets, we should be able to see this. So um, going back here, we can see that this deployment is also complete. So this we just deploy S3 using UCP. The other part of support was for the Terraform also to be able to Terraform provider from Terraform provider from Radius also to be able to deploy the resources. So for that, I have the environment already configured to use a recipe that's using Terraform. Let me just bring that up. So if you go here and look for the extenders, you can see that it's the Terraform kind of recipe. And this is just the website where you could you could go and look at the config files if you're interested and maybe make use of it when you're trying out the feature. So if we go back, let me. So as you can see, I'm deploying an extender here. So going back into a rad deploy Terraform sample. And this deployment should succeed too. So um, I think that pretty much sums up the demo. If there are any questions, please let me know. I'll keep a watch for them on the chat. And it would be great if you can try it out and give us your feedback as well. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Nitya. And thanks to everybody in the Radius maintainership team and the community who contributed or even reviewed the design for this. It was definitely a very requested feature, and we're very excited about bringing sort of these workload and service identity type features to Radius so that users can improve their overall security posture when using Radius. So very cool. And with that, that concludes our demos. And I will leave everyone off with a couple of resources, as always, to engage with the Radius community, including our Discord, our GitHub repo, and then again, a reminder to join the Google group if you'd like to receive updates for Radius. And then we'll be back soon with our next community call, the date for our next community call, which will be in October. Thank you very much for joining, everyone, and hope you have a wonderful day. We'll stay on the line. The Radius folks will stay on the line for any open Q&A that you might have. So again, feel free to raise your hand. We'll unmute you, or you can ask your questions via chat. So we'll stay here for a little bit, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask it. Thanks, everyone, and hopefully we'll see you next month. I'll also stop the recording now with the Q&A session.